Hello everybody and welcome to Forever Motorsports on Forever Sports for the Forever F1 podcast, our weekly podcast here on the channel. I'm joined by Reece and we've got some F1 news coming to you from the last week. And of course, we didn't have a Grand Prix this last weekend, so not much that we can go and talk about in terms of reminiscing over what happened over the weekend. Nothing very much. But of course, we do have the Austrian Grand Prix taking place this weekend, and you can be sure to catch it on Forever Motorsports and Forever Sports, of course, on this channel. Yeah, me and Reece will take you through that entire Grand Prix weekend as it comes to you. But otherwise, Reece, how are you doing? Is there what can we look forward to with Austria coming this week, in terms of points and otherwise things? Just a small little bit talk about, of course, the Austrian Grand Prix coming this week, and then we'll get into news.
Yes, I'm doing well. Thanks, and yourself, Mark. Certainly an exciting race weekend ahead of us. A track that does well with many teams. Red Bull, of course, being the main team that does very well around the Red Bull Ring. Of course, it's their home track in Austria, in the town where their founder is from. So they'll be wanting to do very well here, as well as, of course, a lot of teams will be wanting to make their new upgrade packages work. So we should see a lot more testing going on into this race weekend, and hopefully a lot more teams finding some more gains. Yeah,
and teams that have got information and otherwise news happening about them. One of the big news names from today, especially, and heading into this week with the biggest story in F1, and that is Ryan Reynolds. And Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney, of course, you might know them quite well from their Wrexham journey. Wrexham in the UK, of course. Their big journey with Ryan Reynolds and the ownership there and all of the various things they're doing for sport in the UK. And now it looks like they're diving into F1 as they have joined a group that is buying into Alpine F1. And I goes and have an article here that says Hollywood actors Ryan Reynolds, Rob McElhenney took over Wrexham in 2020, oversaw the club's promotion back to Football League in April. Investment sees Alpine valued at circa £700 million, and Alpine's mountain climber plan is to be fighting for championships within the space of 100 races because Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney are joining the investor group, taking a 24% equity stake in Alpine Racing. I mean, how exciting is that, Reece?
Yes, certainly very exciting for the sport to have some new investment or new investors that have joined the sport, especially those big names of Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds. It's certainly very exciting to have him in the sport. He's such a great character. We've seen how he's had such a good influence on that Wrexham team, him and his partners there. It will be great to see him at a Formula One track for sure.
Yeah, so we've got the Formula One team's parent company, Renault, announcing the move on Monday with a €200 million deal valuing the British-based Alpine at around £700 million following the investment. Alex Shiner, the co-founder and partner of Otro Capital, will join Alpine's board of directors. Deadpool star Reynolds leads the maximum effort investments with McElhenney of American comedy series It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia and fellow actor Michael B. Jordan as co-investors. So Reynolds and his fellow actors, of course, took over Wrexham in November 2020, funding the Welsh soccer club's return to the English Football League, having won the National League in April. Their popular docuseries Welcome to Wrexham has proved a big hit in North America, propelling the little-known club into the spotlight. So the question remains, is now they're getting involved in Alpine and in F1. Could we see similar sort of turnarounds or otherwise stories being made about Alpine? Could we see a mini docu-series being formed? Could we see Alpine starting to make headway into the F1 podium places and otherwise? I mean, it seems to do well for the football club Wrexham. Could the investment of the same budget into Alpine do the same?
I mean, we can't say that it won't happen for sure. I mean, it's Formula One. They've already got their Netflix docuseries that is following all of the drivers and teams so closely. I don't know if they'll be in a contractual obligation to only have one docuseries following them at a time. Possibly they might be, so they're not allowed to have another docuseries filmed. But I mean, if they did, it would be very interesting to see the back end of Alpine.
Yeah, I mean, that's of course something that could be very, very interesting to see. But otherwise, there's not much more to talk about other than the fact that they're getting involved with Alpine and the investment group at least they are part of. So it's not exactly quite them buying Alpine, but they're certainly investing into it as part of a larger company, and they, of course, are part of said company. And another news in terms of big money and otherwise in F1, we've got another piece of information that's also very big news that's also hit us today, and that is the high-tech Grand Prix launch. Exciting F1 2026 bid, which is backed by the Kazakh billionaire. And it goes and says in this article here from Planet F1, High-Tech GP have officially launched an application to join the F1 grid in 2026 after receiving major investment from a Kazakh billionaire. With teams currently competing in F2, F3, and F4, High-Tech are a familiar name in junior racing circles and were founded by former Red Bull junior driver Oliver Oakes in 2015. On Monday, a statement released by High-Tech confirmed a 25% stake in parent company High-Tech Global Holdings Limited has been sold to Kazakh businessman and motor racing enthusiast Vladimir Kim, who, according to Forbes, has a net worth of $4.6 billion. Having achieved a certain level of success in the junior categories, Silverstone-based High-Tech says the gaining an F1 entry would be a move that would complete its single-seater ladder and demonstrate that High-Tech has all the right people, experience, and resources to compete alongside the best teams in the world. The bid comes after 20 months of planning and extensive preparation, with High-Tech currently boasting a workforce of more than 150 people. Kim's main interests are in the mining, banking, and aviation industries, with his Kazakhim and KAZ Minerals Group ranking among the top 10 producers of copper in the world. So certainly no lack of money and funding going into High-Tech's application to join the F1 grid. And they've, of course, it says in the article there, they've got junior structures already in all F2, F3, and F4. So will F1 be relatively simple to get into, or is this going to be a completely new ball game for them?
Oh, I mean, it's a completely new ball game. You can't underestimate Formula One. It is such a difficult motorsport category to compete in. I mean, we see how there's so much competition in the midfield, and that is because it's, of course, so competitive. They're good to have a billionaire on board with them, because it is going to cost them a lot of money to get into Formula One. At the moment, the buy-in fee for a brand new team, Mark, what do you think that costs?
500 million.
200 million.
Okay. So I tried to do a high number because I just knew that it would be very, very high. 200 million. What, and pounds, euros, dollars? I assume dollars.
$200 million, yeah. And teams are trying to get that fee to go even higher up. Because, of course, once you get another team into the grid, that dilutes your winning fees at the end of the year.
So that's an interesting thing, because it doesn't actually say in the article, it doesn't go and explain whether or not that's going to add more cars to the grid or if they're going to be replacing a team. I haven't seen Formula One with more than 20 drivers on the grid in, well, have we ever? I mean, yes, I'm sure we have at some point.
I think we have,
but,
yes.
But for the last good 10 to 15, 20 years, I've only ever seen 20 drivers on the grid, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So if that's the case, I mean, somebody's going to have to drop out, and doesn't actually specify who could possibly be that team. So do you have any ideas? Because, of course, Audi is joining. Now,
yes, Audi is a sure team for 2026 at least. They seem to be very committed to joining. They've already bought Alfa Romeo. I think they start taking over at the beginning of next year. That is the beginning of that Audi takeover. So, yeah, I don't know if they'll possibly be coming on as a sponsor, possibly to Haas or maybe Williams.
Yeah, because one imagines they have to be, if they're coming into Formula One, they have to be replacing a team. And one would look at probably, I think most likely, surely the Haas, considering the Russian tires and otherwise, with that team there. And, you know, they're struggling a lot at the bottom of the field there. And, you know, since the whole Russian war and Ukrainian effort there, they've come under a lot of fire and threat because, of course, it was heavily Russian-backed. I wonder if maybe that's the team that would be dropping out and being replaced by the High-Tech franchise, or maybe you're not, as you say, High-Tech will just get involved as a joining one of the other teams, and it'll be a dual team as you've seen in the past with like Red Bull, Aston Martin, for example.
I don't see Haas leaving anytime soon. They still have a lot of investments in Formula One. I think they are still going to be there for a while. Maybe they will join forces with High-Tech, or maybe High-Tech will enter as a new entry. I mean, it's a lot of money, but I certainly would love to see another 2 cars on the grid, 22 cars on the grid, 24, possibly even more in the future would be great.
Yeah, 22 cars on the grid could be a lot more exciting, of course, because the more drivers, the merrier in terms of creating instances and problems and qualifying, practice, races, etc. More cars means more shambles that could happen. So, I wouldn't be opposed to having more teams, but I do think that very unlikely given the fact that we haven't had more than 20 drivers on the grid for many, many a year. But of course, that is High-Tech GP attempting to launch their bid, at least, to have a team on the F1 grid in 2026, already having teams in F2, F3, and F4. Now, going a little bit closer to home, and we talk about the drivers and the number of drivers that we have. Daniel Ricciardo, who's in Red Bull currently as a reserve driver, has a genuine chance to seal an F1 seat as the Red Bull team are open to the move. And I've got an article here from The Express. Now, I do grant it is The Express, so not necessarily as source-driven as possible, but nonetheless, we'll go to it. It says Daniel Ricciardo could return to the F1 fold next season with AlphaTauri, reporting a genuine possibility for the Australian. Ricciardo has spent 2023 supporting Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez at constructor giants Red Bull. The 33-year-old mutually agreed to terminate his McLaren contract a year early at the end of last season. It is claimed that he was falling out of love with Formula One after struggling for form in 2022. An 8-time race winner, Ricciardo joined former team Red Bull to rekindle his passion for the sport. As part of his contract as a reserve driver, he only needs to attend 8 race weekends. But a quick departure could come soon, despite the driver insisting that it would be a fairy tale to finish his career with his current team. There could be a couple of teams wanting new drivers ahead of the 2024 season. And one of the main front runners for that is AlphaTauri. And would you see him at AlphaTauri?
Well, I think it wouldn't hurt to have him in a seat at all at the moment, possibly in AlphaTauri. There's not as much pressure as in that McLaren seat, which, of course, there was a lot of pressure. He was trying to prove himself against Lando Norris, who, of course, is very, very strong in that car. And he didn't seem like he was himself at McLaren, really. Red Bull also said when he came back into their care that he'd lost quite a lot of weight as well. So they put him on a bit of a better diet and a bit more of a workout routine and got him back to his old ways. He certainly seems a lot happier now at Red Bull than he was in McLaren. So I don't think he would be opposed to going into that sister team and possibly proving himself to go back into the main team.
And I suppose one of the main reasons why that article and that information has surfaced is because of another article from Planet F1, which seems to suggest that Yuki Tsunoda would be prepared to leave the whole Red Bull setup in search of another team who would back him if he gets the opportunity. And his performances have not gone unnoticed, after driving in the shadow of Pierre Gasly last season. And he was touted as a potential option to partner Max Verstappen at Red Bull. However, he does believe if he gets a shot at one of the top teams, he would be willing to leave the Red Bull family. And he says here in an interview to Give Me Sport, I think Checo has a contract to the end of next year, and so I guess Red Bull are happy with him. So for now, I just have to focus on myself and show my value. I think time will tell anyway. I think it's good to actually stay for now at AlphaTauri and show my performance to all the teams. It's good to have more attention, not just from Red Bull. I don't get to choose what team I want to go to or what things I want to do in Formula One yet. I think Red Bull will still get to choose, so I want to get to the point as a driver where I get to choose. Obviously, I want to go to a team that I know, based on the last few years, has been consistently high. Maybe one day AlphaTauri will be in that top part, and in that case, then there's no reason to go to other teams. But anyway, it's good to have a lot of attention because it shows that I have much value, and I think we as drivers, we're happy with things like this. So he seems to suggest that he's very open to move should any bigger team come knocking, and that would certainly open the door for Red Bull to go and put their reserve driver Daniel Ricciardo in an AlphaTauri seat, as that would be vacated by Yuki Tsunoda. So I suppose the planets there sort of do align with regards to those stories. So maybe a hint of truth, or at least certain plans.
Yes, I could see Yuki Tsunoda leaving. I think the more likely of the two drivers in AlphaTauri at the moment to be axed from that seat would be Nick de Vries. He has been rather dismal this year. He's quite a decorated driver, and he's just not really proved himself at all this year against Yuki. Of course, Yuki has had more time in that seat, but still, we really expected Nick de Vries to hit the ground running, and he's been outperformed almost at every race now by Yuki Tsunoda.
Oh, he's just hitting the wall running. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Yes, no,
him and Lance.
it's a good point you bring up, as I say. So, we talk about the Red Bull drivers and all of those involved with the Red Bull outfit, AlphaTauri being associated with them as well. Um, Daniel Ricciardo is currently sitting reserve driver, but Yuki Tsunoda and Nick de Vries are in those AlphaTauri seats, and those AlphaTauris are not doing very well at all. And
I
Yuki
mean,
Tsunoda is certainly outperforming Nick de Vries. De Vries really struggling.
if we're talking about Red Bull drivers under pressure, though, I don't think we can leave out Sergio Perez, who is under quite a lot of pressure at the moment in that second Red Bull seat. He's also not been performing all too well after Monaco. He had a bit of a crash there, and he's just really not been his winning ways after that. He's been well off the pace of Max Verstappen, barely finishing in the top 10. And yeah, his seat will also be under a lot of pressure at the moment. I think well, if Red Bull were to replace him, I don't think Daniel Ricciardo would be at the top of that list.
No, it's something certainly to look forward to in terms of understanding what happens. It is silly season soon. Well, it
Yes.
pretty much is silly season, but certainly after Silverstone, there's a little bit of a break, and maybe some very interesting calls could be made with regards to lots of drivers. Logan Sargent, Nick de Vries, some of those spring to mind. Yeah, of course.
I mean, we also can't forget that Red Bull does still own or have under contract Alex Albon, who's doing brilliantly in the Williams at the moment. So he could also somehow just hop into a Red Bull seat.
I mean, Alex Albon, of course, I think he's certainly proving that he's a fantastic driver this season, really doing as much as he possibly can in what is a hopeless car in the Williams. Logan Sargent, of course, doing next to nothing in it. Yeah, so that is, of course, you make a good point. Lots of things could happen in the silly season coming up, but that was Daniel Ricciardo possibly having a genuine seat next year, and Yuki Tsunoda looking elsewhere should the right offers come in. And I think we go to a team that's not something else that's not really talked about all that much recently, because everybody's pretty much lost faith in them, and that is Ferrari.
Oh, gosh.
And the Ferrari team principal, this is according to Planet F1, Ferrari team principal Fred Vasseur fears that the extended periods of gardening, this being, trying to facilitate for the future, getting people in, will end up postponing the Scuderia's return to winning ways. This, of course, being the addition and allocation of resources for the future and unable to put it in right now. So, with just a single podium finish achieved by Charles Leclerc in Azerbaijan in the first 8 races, Ferrari have endured a tough start to the 2023 season. As well as underperforming on track, the Italian outfit are experiencing a degree of turbulence behind the scenes with a number of high-profile departures. In March, McLaren announced the signing of Ferrari head of vehicle concept David Sanchez, with sporting director and deputy team boss Laurent Marquez also set to leave to replace Franz Tost as the AlphaTauri team principal. Vasseur has expressed his frustration with the contractual situation among engineers in F1, which he says is in stark contrast to the agility team's display in recovering from setbacks on a Grand Prix weekend. The Frenchman has revealed that he has made a key hire, but that individual believed to have been signed from a midfield team will be unable to have an impact on Ferrari's fortunes until 2025. According to the Motorsport.com, he said, "The issue in F1 is inertia. On one hand, we look very agile. We change things, and overnight, sometimes you have an issue and you can fix it from one race to another. But the reality of our business is that when you want to steer the boat a little bit, then we are not agile anymore. We know that if we want to recruit, we are speaking not in days, we are speaking in years. I signed a top guy a couple of weeks ago to join in 2025. He will only work on the car in 2025 and 2026. It seems a long wait, but on the other hand, if you don't do it, it will be worse in 6 months. You have to accept it as a basic of F1. If you stop at one stage, it means you will postpone again even more the impact." So, yeah, just going and saying that Ferrari are in deep trouble basically right now, but it's not something they can change immediately.
No, I mean, it looks like they've made major investments to keeping that team competitive into the future by signing big names like those that have just been mentioned there in the article. I mean, but it's going to take a lot of time until they can actually still contractually come to the team. So they've made all of these investments, but they can't see the benefits just yet. I mean, good to see though that Vasseur is thinking into the future, not necessarily just at the moment where they seem to be struggling in their Formula One team, but at least still, even though he might not be there in the next 5 years, because we see how quickly these team bosses at Ferrari move around. But yeah, he seems to be thinking in the right direction, though, not just thinking at the moment, but also thinking about in the future, which a lot of other team bosses haven't necessarily done.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, though, that he goes and identifies a couple of people that he wants to sign, and otherwise saying that an unknown person is going to be joining in 2025. I'm not even sure he's necessarily going to be there in 2025, given his current state as team boss, really struggling in that Ferrari team. So, but at the same time, can Ferrari really afford to change another team boss in the current scenario? You're making all these plans to try and get Ferrari back to where they should be. And if they have another change of team boss and otherwise structures, you could just postpone yet again, just as he says, postpone the eventual improvement of the very, very famous red Formula One outfit. So a very, very difficult and torrid time for Ferrari, as we know it is, but it just doesn't seem to want to improve.
Yeah, certainly very disappointing for us fans of Ferrari and fans of Formula One in general. We want to see Ferrari back in their winning ways, and we want to see them at the top of the grid and at the top of the timing boards. It's very weird not to see Ferrari being competitive.
Yeah, and that pretty much brings us to the end of the discussion for this Formula One podcast. Reece, do you have anything else you want to add?
Well, just to add on Ferrari, I mean, if they're not able to get themselves back into winning ways soon, we could see Charles Leclerc walking away from that famous outfit and moving somewhere else. And I've got an article here from gpfans.com just saying that Aston Martin could end up having to pay off one of their current drivers to sign Charles Leclerc if he does need to leave Ferrari. I mean, Charles Leclerc could want to move from Ferrari into a more competitive team, and a team that's certainly investing a lot into their future and is very competitive at the moment is Aston Martin. I mean, could we see Leclerc moving across there?
Well, my problem is that I wouldn't replace Fernando Alonso until Fernando Alonso no longer starts competing, because we can see still Fernando Alonso is one of the best drivers on the grid by country mile. They wouldn't make the risk of putting Charles Leclerc in his seat yet. But if Fernando Alonso should announce his retirement, or perhaps, for the season after, and Ferrari are still in turmoil, Charles Leclerc is a fantastic replacement. Of course, we would love to see Charles Leclerc replace Lance Stroll, but that's not going to happen.
You assumed the article spoke in the way of replacing Fernando Alonso, but it actually does go on to say that Alonso is not showing any signs of wanting to leave Aston Martin. However, so any seat that does come up may have to be at the expense of Lance Stroll. I mean, you still have to think at the end of the day, Lawrence Stroll, the owner of the team, he's a businessman. He has to understand the team has to do well. The team has to score as many points as possible. If that is at the expense of your son, who is pretty much just getting a free seat in Formula One for a couple of years, at the expense of your team possibly making hundreds of millions of dollars,
yeah,
my
only problem is that nobody really gets involved with Formula One too much to make, a lot of these guys, when they go and buy a Formula One team or otherwise, they're not doing it for the money. They're doing it for the prestige of owning a Formula One car and being able to say, I own the Formula One team. I don't know if Lance Stroll does look at his son Lance and thinks, I need to get rid of him because I need to make more money in the sport. That's the next question. But if he was cutthroat, which I doubt he is, but if he was cutthroat, maybe he does get rid of his son and says, hey, because then you could have two incredible drivers in Charles Leclerc and Fernando Alonso racing in that Aston Martin. That could be something incredible to watch.
But I mean, you have to think of it from a sponsor's standpoint as well. Aston Martin has massive sponsors that have joined on board with them, and they are going to want to see that car compete as high as it can. If they hear that Charles Leclerc has contacted the team wanting to sign for them, and they pretty much turned them down because their second driver is the owner's son, what are they going to say? They're just going to jump ship. So you still want to stay competitive and show that you do have two of the more competitive drivers on the grid, so if you're going to be a top competing team.
So essentially what you're saying is Lawrence Stroll, in order to solve this entire conundrum, needs to buy another team. He needs to buy another team because unfortunately it's his son. I don't see him firing his son. I see the potential. He's a businessman. He makes millions. He needs to buy another team. Send his son there, and that's like the alternative to Red Bull, like AlphaTauri. It's just the rubbish little team at the end there that we just keep our other parts there just to do some development and ideas, and then put our actual drivers in the Aston Martin team. So what Lance Stroll needs to do is just buy another team, and then get Charles Leclerc and Fernando Alonso as main drivers for Aston Martin and ship Lance Stroll down to whatever team that is.
I mean, that would be ideal, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. Yeah.
Yeah, essentially, it's not something that we're going to necessarily see. But I suppose if Lance Stroll really does struggle and maybe the conversation is had, that would be a brilliant move for Aston Martin, because certainly I do think Charles Leclerc is actually open to a move. And if the
Yes, I
right
think
team
he's
like
getting
Aston
very
Martin,
frustrated.
I think if the right team like Aston Martin came along and said, "Would you like to come race for us?" I think he would jump ship in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I mean, you can't turn down a super competitive car, but I mean, it might be very hard to leave that Ferrari team. It's such a prestigious team. You're treated like absolute royalty when you're a Ferrari driver, but at the same time, you really do get left out high and dry a lot by Ferrari, and you can't say anything against them. Otherwise, you get a lot of backlash. You have to really watch what you say in the media. I think a lot of that as well, he would be happy to get rid of. But I mean, you're still, at the end of the day, a Ferrari driver. Would you be willing to give that up?
Well, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, in that same breath, who's more famous at the moment, Fernando Alonso or Charles Leclerc?
Exactly.
One's getting a lot of talk, the other's being forgotten about. And at the end of the day, the one who's in the Ferrari car is not the one that's being talked about. So, if he wants to get back in the media shine and everything like that, the prestige of Ferrari is very quickly slipping away should they not fix their turmoil. And you don't want to fall away with it. So, yeah, lots of very interesting times coming up. But that brings us to the end of this week's Forever F1 podcast with Reece. Reece, any final, very long, small comments unless you have something else?
Only thing is just the little bit of chatter about Lewis Hamilton's contract talks. He's supposedly wanting about $250 million for a 5-year contract, so $50 million a year. I don't know if we'll see that happening. I mean, that's a lot of money. His current contract's, I think, 30 to 40 million a year. So, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. But of course, we'll bring that news to you should it come in for a new contract for Lewis Hamilton. Otherwise, guys, join us this weekend. Actually, this Thursday for our preview to the Austrian Grand Prix, our 10th round of racing for the 2023 season. The Red Bull home race, of course. Lots of things could happen this weekend. Lots of upgrades for all the major teams. And they do reckon this could be a very, very competitive Grand Prix. So don't go anywhere. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and turn on notifications to be notified about all future uploads. And from me and Reece, we're going to head on out. And we'll see you this weekend for the Austrian Grand Prix. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching and listening to the Forever F1 podcast. Cheerio.